The first time they tore down my fence, they didn't even bother knocking on my door first. I came home from grabbing groceries, turned onto Alder Creek Road like I had done almost every day for the last 12 years, and just sat there staring through my windshield because for a second my brain honestly couldn't process what I was looking at. 40 feet of cedar fencing was gone, completely gone, splintered into piles beside a muddy trench, while a yellow excavator sat halfway across my backyard like it owned the place. And the worst part wasn't even the damage. It was the fact that the workers looked at me like I was the inconvenience. Like I was the guy interrupting their day. That was the moment I realized this whole thing was never just about construction. It was about arrogance. My house sits at the very end of Alder Creek, tucked between old maples and cracked sidewalks nobody from City Hall ever remembers to fix. It's not some fancy historic landmark or anything, but around here people know it. My grandfather built it back in 1934 after coming home from Pennsylvania with exactly $40 and a toolbox missing 2 handles. Every floorboard in that house creaks like it's carrying family memories inside it. My mother used to joke the walls could probably testify in court if they had to. Behind my property there used to be this abandoned warehouse lot that had sat empty since the late and Oppos 90s. Rusted chain-link fences, weeds taller than your waist, shopping carts tipped over in puddles. One of those places everybody complained about, but nobody ever touched. Then one morning the survey flag showed up, bright orange markers everywhere like somebody had stabbed the earth with little warning signs. A month later the demolition crews rolled in. The company behind it was called Redwood Urban Development, one of those sleek corporate outfits with glossy signs showing smiling fake families holding coffee cups in buildings that somehow never look real. Their plan was massive. Ground floor retail, luxury lofts upstairs, underground parking garage, rooftop garden, all squeezed right behind homes that had been there nearly a century. Most people on the block were cautiously optimistic at first. Property values, safer streets, fewer abandoned lots. You hear enough of that, and eventually you start convincing yourself maybe it'll be okay. Even I try to keep an open mind. I'm not one of those guys who hates change just because it's change. But then I met Brent Coulter. Brent was the site superintendent, early 40s maybe, sharp beard, mirrored sunglasses, the kind of man who somehow manages to look smug even while holding a clipboard. First time we spoke, he walked onto my driveway without introducing himself, looked around my yard like he was pricing it out for demolition too, then said, "You're probably going to want to keep your windows shut for the next year and a half." Didn't say hello, didn't shake my hand, just straight into a warning. I remember laughing a little and saying, "Well, long as your crew stays on your side of the property line, we won't have any problems." And man, the way he smiled at me after that should have told me everything. Not angry, not rude exactly. Worse than that, dismissive, like a grown man humoring a child. He gave this lazy little nod and said, "We'll do our best," before walking off toward the excavators. Now here's the thing about people like Brent. They mistake patience for weakness. They see somebody calm, somebody polite, somebody living alone in an old house, and they automatically assume nobody's going to push back. What he didn't know was my grandfather spent 30 years fighting the county over drainage rights behind this property. I grew up hearing stories about survey disputes at the dinner table. My family kept records of everything. Old maps, permits, land transfers, photographs. My mother used to store copies in plastic tubs like they were war documents. So when I saw tire tracks cutting through my side yard that first week, I noticed. When workers started taking smoke breaks leaning against my garage wall, I noticed that too. And when one of the laborers casually moved my trash cans because they were in the way, something in my gut started telling me this was heading somewhere ugly. Still, I tried being reasonable. That's the part people always leave out when they tell these stories later. They skip straight to the revenge. But the truth is most of us spend a long time trying not to become the bad guy first. 3 days before they destroyed my fence, I walked over to the site trailer carrying a box of donuts from Miller's Bakery. Figured maybe if I acted neighborly, they'd act neighborly back. A couple workers thanked me. One younger guy even apologized for the noise. Brent barely looked up from his paperwork. Then he pointed at the back of my property and said something that made the hair on my neck stand up. "We're going to need a little flexibility from you during this project." I said, "What exactly does that mean?" And he smiled again. That same smile. You'll see. I should have trusted my instincts right there, because 3 days later I pulled into my driveway, and saw half my backyard torn open like a tornado had clipped just one side of the property and kept moving. My cedar fence was gone, not carefully removed, not stacked aside for replacement, destroyed. Boards snapped in half, posts ripped straight out of the ground, chunks of concrete scattered through the grass, while two dump trucks rolled back and forth across the edge of my yard like it was part of their job site now. For a second, I honestly just sat there gripping the steering wheel. You know that feeling where you get so angry your body actually goes quiet? That's what it felt like. Like every sound around me got sucked underwater. Then one of the workers waved at me, waved, and yelled, "You can still get through on the left." Like he was directing traffic at a grocery store parking lot. I got out of the truck and walked straight toward the excavation pit. Mud everywhere, diesel fumes thick in the air, backup alarms screaming every 30 seconds. And right in the middle of all of it was Brent, standing beside a set of blueprints, drinking iced coffee like this was the most normal day in the world. I said, "What the hell happened to my fence?" Didn't even look surprised. "We had to widen access for the concrete trucks," he said. I remember staring at him, waiting for the rest of the sentence. The apology. The explanation. Something. Nothing came. I said, "That fence was on private property." And this man actually shrugged. "We'll replace it later." Like he was talking about a traffic cone. I could feel people watching us now. Workers slowing down nearby, pretending not to listen. One older laborer looked genuinely uncomfortable. Brent didn't care. Guys like him never think consequences apply in real time. I told him, "You don't get to tear down somebody's property because it's convenient." He sighed like I was exhausting him. "Sir, we're on a deadline here." That word, sir, the way he said it. Not respectful, not polite. Condescending. Like I was some cranky old man complaining about leaves blowing into the yard. I said, "You need to rebuild it. Immediately." And he laughed. Not loud. Honestly, that almost made it worse. Just this short little breath through his nose while shaking his head. "If you want it fixed that badly," he said, "hire somebody." I don't think he realized how quiet I got after that. Because anger's dangerous when it turns cold. That night, I barely slept. Every time headlights passed through my bedroom window, I kept picturing those excavators rolling through my yard. Around midnight, I walked outside with a flashlight just to look at the damage again. The garage wall that used to be hidden behind cedar boards was fully exposed now. Tire ruts cut through the grass. Somebody had dropped cigarette butts near my mother's rose bushes. And standing there in the dark, I started noticing something else. The trucks weren't just crossing near my property line. They were crossing over it. Every single delivery truck entering the site was cutting diagonally through the back corner of my lot because the angle into the excavation pit was too tight otherwise. They'd basically turned 6 feet of my land into a permanent construction lane. I walked back inside, dug through an old filing cabinet in the hallway closet, and found the original property survey my grandfather paid for in 1971 after some dispute with the city utility department. Yellowed paper, red markings, official county stamps, still perfectly readable. Next morning, I called a surveyor named Walter Griggs, a guy probably pushing 70 who'd been measuring land boundaries around this county since before I was born. He came out 2 days later wearing muddy boots and carrying enough equipment to launch a satellite. Walter spent maybe 20 minutes taking measurements before looking at me over his glasses and saying, "Well, they're definitely not where they're supposed to be." I asked how bad it was. He pointed toward the excavation lane and said, "At their widest point? About 6.5 feet onto your parcel." Then he gave this little whistle and added, "That superintendent's either reckless or stupid." Turns out he was both. Now here's where people think I must have immediately hired lawyers or started screaming lawsuits everywhere. I didn't. Honestly, I still wanted a peaceful solution. I even gave Brent another chance. I walked into the site office carrying the updated survey documents and laid them right on his desk. I said, "Your trucks are trespassing across my property every single day. You remove your equipment, rebuild my fence, and stay off my land. We can end this right now." He barely glanced at the paperwork. Then he leaned back in his chair and said something I'll never forget. "You know how many people threaten legal action against developers every year?" I said nothing. He smirked and continued, "You'll spend more money fighting this than your property's worth." That one landed hard. Not because it scared me, because it told me exactly who he was. To Brent, people like me weren't neighbors. We were obstacles. Numbers. Annoyances standing in the way of deadlines and bonuses and investor meetings. I picked up the survey papers, folded them slowly, and said, "Okay." That was it. No yelling. No threats. Just okay. And weirdly enough, I think that made him more confident. Because when somebody expects a fight and you stay calm instead, arrogant people mistake that for surrender every single time. The next 48 hours were productive. I hired a fencing contractor named Luis Ortega, who owned this small local company with maybe 4 employees and an ancient pickup truck held together entirely by rust and faith. I showed him the survey markers and explained exactly what I wanted. An 8-foot commercial chain-link barrier with reinforced steel posts set deep enough to survive a tornado. Luis looked from the property line to the construction entrance and started grinning before I even finished talking. "Oh," he said, "you're serious." By sunrise the next morning, they were pouring concrete footings. And by lunchtime, the entire back access lane was gone. Blocked. Completely. The fence sliced across the exact strip of land Brent's crews had been illegally using for weeks. Suddenly, trucks couldn't angle into the excavation site anymore. Cement mixers had to reverse from the front entrance one at a time while workers screamed directions over jackhammer noise. Deliveries backed up onto Alder Creek Road. Neighbors came outside just to watch the chaos unfold like it was live television. And right around 2 p.m., Brent finally noticed. I was standing on my porch drinking iced tea when his black company SUV came flying around the corner way too fast. He slammed the brakes so hard gravel sprayed across the curb. Then he jumped out already yelling, "What the hell is this?" I took another sip and said, "Fence." His face turned red instantly. "You can't block side access." I said, "Actually, I can. It's my property." He stormed toward the chain link barrier, grabbed it with both hands, rattled it violently, then pointed at the fresh concrete bases. "Move this damn thing." That's when I handed him a folder. Inside was the updated survey, permit approvals, time-stamped photographs, and stills from the 2 security cameras I'd installed the night before facing directly at the property line. I told him, "Touch that fence and I'll file criminal charges before sunset." And for the first time since I met him, Brent Coulter looked nervous. You could actually see the exact moment reality finally hit him. Brent stopped yanking on the fence, looked down at the paperwork in his hands, then glanced back toward the construction site, where 3 cement trucks were now completely stuck because there wasn't enough turning space anymore. Workers were standing around waiting for instructions, engines idling, horns going off, and for the first time since this whole mess started, he wasn't the guy in control of the situation anymore. He lowered his voice real quick after that. "Look," he said, trying to sound reasonable all of a sudden, "we can work something out here." Funny how respect always shows up right after consequences do. I said nothing, just stood there on the porch. Then came the offers. First, he said they'd rebuild my original fence free of charge if I moved the new one back temporarily. I told him no. Then he offered $5,000 for an easement during construction. No again. By the third conversation, he was standing in my driveway sweating through his button-up shirt offering 10 grand, a brand new cedar fence, professional landscaping, and a written apology drafted by their legal department. Still no. And honestly, by then it wasn't even about the money anymore. It was about the principle of it. People ask me now why I didn't just take the payout and move on. Truth is, I probably could have made easy money off the whole thing. But every time I looked at that muddy strip where my grandfather's fence used to stand, I kept thinking about how casually they erased it. No permission, no conversation. Just gone because somebody in a hard hat decided my property was less important than their schedule. That kind of thinking spreads if nobody pushes back. Within a week, the entire project started slipping behind schedule. Trucks had to enter through the narrow front alley 1 vehicle at a time. Deliveries got delayed. Concrete pours had to be rescheduled twice because equipment couldn't maneuver properly into the excavation area anymore. According to one electrician I talked to later, crews were wasting almost 3 hours a day just rerouting machinery. And construction delays bleed money faster than a Vegas casino. One afternoon, my next-door neighbor Diane brought over banana bread purely so she could stand on my porch and watch the chaos. Every few minutes, another foreman would come outside pointing at my fence like it personally offended him. Diane leaned toward me and whispered, "You know they hate you now, right?" I said, "Good." That woman laughed so hard, she almost dropped the bread. But underneath all the satisfaction, there was still this weird heaviness sitting in my chest. Because the truth is I never wanted a war with anybody. I liked my quiet little life. Coffee on the porch, baseball on the radio, trimming hedges on Sunday mornings. Suddenly, reporters from the local paper were calling because somebody posted drone footage of the blocked construction entrance online, and it started spreading around neighborhood Facebook groups. One headline actually called me the fence guy. My mother would have found that hilarious. About 3 weeks after the barrier went up, everything changed again. I came home one evening and noticed Brent's company SUV wasn't parked near the trailers anymore. Next morning, all the workers were quieter than usual, heads down, weird tension in the air. Around noon, a woman in a gray coat knocked on my front door holding a leather folder against her chest. "Mr. Bennett?" she asked. I said yeah. She introduced herself as Claire Donovan, the new project director for Redwood Urban Development. And instantly I could tell she was different. No arrogance. No fake corporate smile. Just exhausted professionalism. She asked if we could talk. We sat on my back patio, maybe 15 feet from the giant chain-link fence that had basically become neighborhood legend by then. Claire looked at the construction site for a long second before speaking. "I reviewed everything," she said quietly. "The surveys, the footage, the insurance reports. What happened here should never have happened." Simple sentence. But man, after weeks of being treated like I was unreasonable, hearing somebody finally admit that out loud almost caught me off guard. I asked what happened to Brent. She hesitated before answering. "He's no longer with the company." Corporate language for fired. Turns out Redwood's executives found out he authorized demolition on private property without permits, ignored survey markers, and continued using my land even after being formally warned. The delays alone were reportedly costing them close to $20,000 a day between labor overruns, equipment rentals, and missed contractor deadlines. All because one guy couldn't admit he was wrong. Claire asked me what it would take to resolve everything permanently. And honestly, I'd already thought about it 100 times. I told her I wanted my original cedar privacy fence rebuilt exactly the way it was before, only stronger. I wanted evergreen trees planted along the entire rear property line for privacy. I wanted written guarantees that no worker, vehicle, or equipment would ever cross onto my property again. And I wanted the construction crews to stop treating the neighborhood like collateral damage. She nodded after every single point. No arguing. No negotiating. Just writing notes. Then she surprised me. She said, "You know, my grandfather built houses too. Small ones. He used to say the fastest way to destroy a neighborhood is convincing people they don't belong there anymore." That one stuck with me. Because deep down, I think that's what this whole thing had really been about from the start. Not fences. Not concrete trucks. Respect. The feeling that ordinary people still deserve space in a world constantly being bought, rebuilt, and priced out around them. A week later, crews arrived and rebuilt the fence better than before. Thick cedar panels, reinforced posts, clean lines. They planted 6 evergreen trees behind it, tall enough that eventually I wouldn't even see the apartment building anymore once they filled out. And to Claire's credit, she kept her word. The project finally finished almost 5 months late. Last I heard, Redwood's insurance company spent nearly a year fighting lawsuits over the delays and property damage claims tied back to Brent's decisions. Meanwhile, the building opened with fancy grand opening banners, rooftop wine mixers, all the usual stuff developers love showing off. But the funny part? From the upper apartments, the very first thing tenants see looking west is my fence. Still standing, still exactly on the property line. And every once in a while, Claire stops by to check how the evergreens are growing. We'll stand there talking about weather or rising grocery prices or whatever, and sometimes we both glance toward that building behind us like survivors of the same strange storm. Now, personally, I still think Brent believed he was going to win right up until the very end. Guys like that usually do. But I'm curious what you think. If somebody destroys your property because they think their project matters more than your home, do you fight back no matter the cost? Or would you have taken the money and moved on? Let me know down in the comments. Because honestly, half the neighborhood still argues about whether I went too far.